everyone, Sarah Healy with the Salvation Army City Salvos in Adelaide here, and I'm here to share about the next chapter in our Discipleship Experiment, where we're looking at Mark chapter 16, verses 9 to 20. As you may be aware by these studies now, we look at the passage, we explore what stands out for us, we figure out something that we are going to learn, what is Jesus and God telling us about it, and what can we do about it during the week, and then we follow up a few days later with what have we done about that and what have we learned. So we've got this passage today called Mark 16, verses 9 to 20 again, and I must admit that initially my brain, because that's the way it works, my brain was led down a really interesting rabbit warren of following many of these scriptures say about this passage that this passage isn't in everybody's manuscript, isn't in all the Bibles, it isn't in some of the earliest manuscripts, and it's kind of tacked on the end of some of them. So my questioning brain sort of goes, well, why? Well, why not? And where did it come from? And where would it have been done from? And then who wrote it? And why is it not included? And all those sorts of things. That's how my brain works. And it was a really interesting study. It was a really interesting exploration that got me into scribes and history of documents and those sorts of bits and pieces. But I don't think that's what God was trying to teach me. He kept drawing me back to there's something more in this passage. So I kept reading it and I kept digging a bit more. So for me, this passage is a quick recap of the way Jesus appears to some of his disciples after his resurrection. It talks about appearing to Mary. It talks about to two men on the road, which presumably is Emmaus. And then it talks about a doubting disciple, which presumably again is Thomas. And then he tells off his disciples. He shows up and he tells them and he rebukes them for their lack of faith. He tells them off for their stubborn refusal to believe these stories that others have been telling about his appearances. And then he tells them, go and do it yourself. Go and preach the gospel to all. Do signs and do wonders and go and explore and preach my name. And then he leaves them. He disappears. This is often called the ascension and is also found in other passages of the Bible. But Jesus left and goes to sit at the right hand of God. Now, one of the beautiful things about this passage that stood out, apart from the wonderful rabbit warren at the start, was that you've got a group of people who have been told off for having a lack of faith, disbelief, a group of people who have struggled, who are flawed. And yet at the very end, in verse 20, it says they did it. They actually went and did what they were told and commanded to do. They went out and preached everywhere, and the Lord worked with them and confirmed his words by the signs that accompanied it. A few things stood out to me about that. Firstly, again, these disciples had shown numerous times how they were still struggling to understand. I mean, and these guys had spent 3 or so years with Jesus, learning, seeing firsthand, sleeping next to him, eating with him, sharing, having fun, fishing, bits and pieces. But God still used them, even in their disbelief and their humility and their mistakes and their flaws, to change the world. I think that gives me a bit of grace, considering that I'm doing my very best now and I have him in me, but I don't have him physically there in front of me saying, what are you doing, Sarah? I hear it. But secondly, about this passage, I woke up this morning after pondering this over the last couple of days, and the image that I was given was that of a security blanket. You know what you give a child that they cling like a toy, that gives them comfort, that they can go to sleep better knowing that they've got their blankie with them, or it's a favourite toy that they need to go into new situations with. It gives them courage to do so. And for me, this image sort of got into this passage that Jesus was their security blanket. He was the one that had been giving them courage, that had been prompting them, that had been helping them, that had been pushing them. And as in this very passage, he's saying, come on guys, this is it. Stop unbelieving and just go and do. And then their security blanket leaves, disappears in front of their very eyes, and goes and sits with God. Now, have you ever seen a child lose their security blanket? Or can't find their special bunny? Have you ever seen parents search desperately for it and where it's been and visit all the places that they went that day just to make sure that that child can actually get to sleep that night with their special toy? We know the reality is that that child doesn't actually need that blanket. They can sleep without it, but it comforts them. It gives them that sense of courage or perseverance or strength that they needed at the time. And so for the disciples, when Jesus leaves them, physically in front of them, leaves them, he is no longer appearing as he did before. The disciples, they could have panicked, but this time they don't seem to have. That sort of analogy got me thinking in my life and my ministry, because I too am like the disciples. God has called me to go and preach the gospel to the world. Go and do it. This is often called the Great Commission to all the disciples. Go and spread this good news. And I've really been thinking about what my security blankets are. What are the things that give me the boost, the encouragement, the comfort to go and actually do this? I thought of a couple and I thought I'd share them with you. Firstly is this uniform. This is a beautiful legacy and history the Salvation Army has. And it is amazing to be able to work for an organisation that's got 150 years of ways of helping and growing people and transforming lives and spreading Jesus' name. And when I wear this shield, it's almost an expectation that I'll talk to them about who we are and what we do. But do I need this shield in order to do that? No. As a disciple, as a person inside, I'm still called to do it. I thought about my husband. Now, my husband is a wonderful encourager. He's a comfort. He winds me up chronically as well. But he also makes it easier when we go out together, knowing he's there and he's looking at me when I share, gives me encouragement, gives me strength. Do I need him around to actually be able to share my faith with others? Probably not. I am called to do it regardless. It's helpful. He's a nice fella. Don't tell him I didn't need him. But do I actually need him around to give me that push all the time? No. It does make it easier. And then I thought about this church. I thought about this preaching rostrum up here. I have a captive audience on a Sunday morning that are here specifically to hear through God, to hear from God through me. It definitely does make it easier because they're sitting there expecting it. But do I need a platform on a Sunday morning to share my faith and to talk about Jesus? No. And I thought for some of us, maybe Sunday church had become a security blanket, because it is a lot easier to talk about Jesus when we're here, to live out his life, to ask questions when we're here than when we're in the context of maybe a family in our work situation. But do we actually need a set time on Sunday to be a Christian? No. We are called to be one everywhere we are during the week, to preach the gospel to all the world. Now, security blankets aren't a bad thing. As I said, they give us comfort, they bring us challenge, they bring us encouragement and strength. But we also need to recognise them and learn to see them for what they are. And we need to do this so that when they disappear, our worlds won't collapse. We won't throw tantrums. We won't kick and scream and feel powerless, because we have power. We have our Christ in us. And it really made me question, would I be sharing differently without all these things if they were all gone? Could I be sharing my faith without a job, without this building, without the people support in my life? So this week my task is to explore my response to what Jesus is calling his disciples to do, to go and preach the gospel to all. To figure out, like I've mentioned before, some of those things that I've been perhaps clinging to a bit strongly, things I've been leaning on a bit too much in order to be able to spread this message. Because the disciples' security blankets were gone. Jesus disappeared before their eyes. Their formal careers were gone. The group was splitting up to spread this gospel message throughout the world. And they still went and they performed miracles and they changed the world around them. So that's my challenge this week. Sorry it's been a bit longer than other ones, but I hope you are really exploring that call from last week to follow and that call this week to spread that new good news. And we hope to hear exciting things, and you'll hear from me how my week went too in a few days. So God bless you each, and we'll hear from you soon. Bye.